Welcome to the 1000 Nights and 1 Night. Now, when it was the 925th night, she pursued, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that the king blamed himself, saying, 'Twas I that hearkened to you in mine ignorance, and slew my Wazirs, so that now I find none to stand in their stead. And unless Allah succor me with one of sound judgment, who shall guide me to that wherein is my deliverance, I am fallen into utter perdition.' Then he arose and withdrew into his bedchamber, bemoaning his Wazirs and wise men, and saying, 'Would heaven those lions were with me at this time, though but for an hour, so I might excuse myself unto them, and look on them, and bemoan to them my case, and the travail that hath betided me after them.' And he abode all this day sunken in the sea of cark and care, neither eating nor drinking. But as soon as night fell dark, he arose, and changing his raiment, donned old clothes, and disguised himself, and went forth at a venture to walk about the city, so haply he might hear from any some word of comfort. As he wandered about the main streets, behold, he chanced upon 2 boys, who had sought a retired seat by a wall, and he observed that they were equal in age, or about 12 years old. As they talked about together, they drew near them, when as he might hear and apprehend what they said, unseen of them, and heard one of them say to the other, 'Listen, O my brother, to that what my sire told me yesterday night, of the calamity which hath betided him in the withering of his crops before their time, by reason of the rarity of rain, and the sore sorrow that has fallen on the city.' Quoth the other, 'Wottest thou not the cause of this affliction?' And quoth the first, 'No. And if thou ken it, pray tell it to me.' Rejoined the other, 'Yes, I wot it, and will tell it to thee. Know that I heard from one of my father's friends that our king slew his Wazirs and grandees, not for aught of offence done of them, but only by reason of his love for women, and an inclination to them. For that his ministers forbade him from this, but he would not be forbidden, and commanded to do them die in obedience to his wives. Thus he slew Shimas, my sire, who was his Wazir, and the Wazir of his father before him, and the chief of his councils. But right soon thou shalt see how Allah will do with him by reason of his sins against them, and how he shall avenge of them all.' The other boy said, 'What can Allah do now that they are dead?' And his fellow answered, 'Know that the king of Outer Hind maketh light of our monarch, and hath sent him a letter, berating him, and saying to him, Build me a castle middlemost the sea, or I will send unto thee Badia, my Wazir, with 12 hordes of horses, each 12,000 strong, to seize upon thy kingdom, and slay thy men, and carry thee and thy women into captivity. And he hath given him 3 days' time to answer after the receipt of that missive. Now thou must know, O my brother, that this king of Outer Hind is a masterful tyrant, a man of might and prowess in fight, and in his realm are much people. So unless our king make shift to fend him off himself, he will fall into perdition, whilst the king of Hind, after slaying our sovereign, will seize on our possessions, and massacre our men, and make prize of our women.' When the king heard their talk, his agitation increased, and he inclined to the boys, saying, 'Surely this boy is a wizard, in that he is acquainted with this thing which, without learning it from me, for the letter is in my keeping, and the secret also, as none hath knowledge of such matter but myself. How then knoweth this boy of it? I will resort to him and talk with him, and I pray Allah that our deliverance may be at his hands.' Hereupon the king approached the boy softly, and said to him, 'O thou dear boy, what is this thou sayest of our king, that he did ill of the evilest in slaying his Wazirs and chiefs of state? Indeed he sinned against himself and his subjects, and thou art right in that which thou sayest. But tell me, O my son, whence knowest that the king of Outer Hind hath written him a letter, berating him, and speaking him with a grievous speech, whereas thou tellest?' The boy replied, 'O brother, I know this from the sand, wherewith I take compt of night and day, and from the saying of the ancients. No mystery from Allah is hidden, for the sons of Adam have in their spiritual virtue, which discovereth to them the darkest secrets.' Answered Word Khan, 'True, O my son, but whence learnest thou geomancy, and thou young of years?' Quoth the boy, 'My father taught it of me.' And quoth the king, 'Is thy father alive or dead?' 'He is dead,' replied the boy. Then Word Khan asked, Is there any resource or device for our king whereby to ward off himself and his kingdom this sore calamity? And the boy answered, saying, It befitteth not that I speak with thee of this, but an the king send for me and ask me how he shall do to battle his foe and get free of his snares, I will acquaint him with that wherein by the power of Allah Almighty shall be his salvation. Rejoined Ward Khan, But who shall tell the king of this, that he may send for thee and invite thee to him? The boy retorted, I hear that he seeketh men of experience and good counsel, so I will go up with them to him, and tell him that wherein shall be his welfare, and the warding off of this affliction from him. But an he neglect the pressing matter, and busy himself with his love lust among his women, and I go to him of my own accord, designing to acquaint him with the means of deliverance, he will surely give orders to slay me, even as he slew those his wazirs, and my courtesy to him will be the cause of my destruction. Wherefore the folk will think slightly of me, and belittle my wit, and I shall be of those of whom it is said, He whose science excelleth his sense perish by his ignorance. When the king heard the boy's words, he was assured of his sagacity, and the excellence of his merit was manifest, and he was certified that deliverance would betide him and his subjects at the boy's hand. So presently he resumed the colloquy and asked him, Whence art thou, and where is thy home? And the boy answered, This is the wall of our house. The king took note of the place, and farewelling the boy, returned to his palace in high spirits. There he changed his clothes and called for meat and wine, forbidding his women from him. And he ate and drank, and returned thanks to Allah the Most High, and besought him of succor and deliverance. And he craved his pardon and forgiveness for that which he had done with his wazirs and olimas, and turned to him with sincere repentance, imposing on himself many a prayer and long fasting by way of his discipline vow. Now on the morrow he called one of his confidential eunuchs, and describing to him the boy's home, bade him repair thither and bring him to his presence with all gentleness. Accordingly the slave sought out the boy, and said to him, The king summoneth thee, that good may betide thee from him, and that he may ask thee a question. Then shalt thou return safe and sound to thy dwelling. Asked the boy, What is the king's need of me, that he biddeth me to him on this wise? And the eunuch answered, My lord's occasion with thee is question and answer. 1,000 times hearkening, and 1,000 times obeying the commandment of the king, replied the boy, and accompanied the slave to the palace. When he came into the presence, he prostrated himself before Allah, and after salaming, came down the blessings on the king, who returned his salutation and bade him be seated. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. Now, when it was the 926th night, she resumed, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the boy appeared before the king and saluted him with a salam, Ward Khan returned his salutation and bade him be seated. So he sat down, and the king asked him, Knowest thou who talked with thee yesterday night? Answered the boy, Yes. And the king said, And where is he? 'Tis he who speaketh with me at this present, said the boy. Rejoined the king, Thou sayest sooth, O friend, and bade set him a chair beside his own, whereon he made him sit, and called for meat and drink. Then they talked a while, and the king said, Ho thou the Wazir, in our talk yesterday, what thou toldest me that thou hast a device whereby thou couldst defend us from the malice of the king of Hind. What is this contrivance, and how shall we maneuver to ward off his mischief from us? Tell me, that I may make thee chief of those who speak with me in the realm, and choose thee to be my Grand Wazir, and do according to thy judgment in all thou counsellest me, and assign thee a splendid honorarium. Answered the boy, O king, keep thy honorarium to thyself, and seek counsel and policy of thy women, who directed thee to slay my father Shimas and the rest of the wazirs. When the king heard this, he was ashamed, and he sighed, and he said, O thou, my dear boy, was Shimas indeed thy sire? The boy replied, Shimas was indeed my sire, and I am in truth his son. Whereupon the king bowed his head, whilst the tears ran down his eyes, and he craved pardon of Allah. Then said he, O boy, indeed, I did this of my ignorance, and by the evil counsel of the women, for great indeed is their malice. But I beseech thee to forgive me, and I will set thee in thy father's stead, and make thy rank higher than his rank. Moreover, an thou do away from us this retribution, sent down from heaven, I will deck thy neck with a collar of gold, and mount thee on the goodliest of steeds, and bid the crier make proclamation before thee, saying, This is the Leaf Boy, the Wazir, who sitteth in the second seat after the king. And touching what thou sayest of the women, I have it in mind to do vengeance on them, at such time as Almighty Allah shall with it. But tell me now, what hast thou with thee of counsel and contrivance, that my heart may be content? Quoth the boy, Swear to me an oath that thou wilt not gainsay me in whatso I shall say to thee, and that I from that which I fear shall be safe. And quoth the king, This is the covenant of Allah between me and thee, that I will not go from thy word, and that thou shalt be my chief counselor, and whatsoever thou biddest me, that will I do. And the Almighty Lord is witness betwixt us twain whatso I say. Therewith the boy's breast waxed broad, and the field of speech was opened to him wide, and he said, O king, my rede to thee is that thou await the expiration of the delay appointed to thee by answering the courier of the king of Hind, and when he cometh before thee seeking the reply, do thou put him off to another day. With this he will excuse himself to thee on the ground of his master having appointed him a certain fixed days, and importune for an answer, but do thou rebute him, and defer him to another day, without specifying what day it be. Then will he go forth from thee and angered, and betake himself into the midst of the city, and speak openly among the folk, saying, O people of the city, I am a courier of the king of the outer Hind, who is a monarch of great puissance, and of determination such as softeneth iron. He sent me with a letter to the king of the city, appointing to me certain days, saying, An thou be not with me by the time appointed, my vengeance shall fall on thee. Now behold, I went into the king of the city, and gave him the message, which when he had read, he sought of me a delay of 3 days, after which he would return me an answer to the letter, and I agreed to this as a matter of courtesy and consideration for him. When the 3 days were past, I went to seek the reply of him, but he delayed me to another day, and now I have no patience to wait longer. So I am about to return to my lord, the king of the outer Hind, and acquaint him with that which hath befallen me. And ye, O folk, are witness between me and him. All this will be reported to thee, and do thou send for him, and speak him gently, and say to him, O thou, who seekest thine own ruin, what hath moved thee to blame us among our subjects? Verily, thou deservest present death at our hands. But the ancients say clemency is of the attributes of nobility. Know that our delay in answering arose not from helplessness on our part, but from our much business and lack of leisure to look into thine affair, and write a reply to thy king. Then call for the scroll, and read it again, and laugh loud and long, and say to the courier, Hast thou a letter other than this? If so, we will write thee an answer to that also. He will say, I have none other than this letter. But do thou repeat thy question to him a second time, and a third time. He will reply, I have none other at all. Then say to him, Verily, this thy king is utterly witless, in that he writeth us the like of this writ, seeking to arouse our wrath against us, so that we shall go forth to him with our forces, and domineer over his dominions, and capture his kingdom. But we will not punish him this time for his unmannerly manners, as shown in this letter, because he is wanting in wit and feeble of foresight, and it beseemeth our dignity that we must first warn him not to repeat the like of these childish extravagances. And if he risk his life by returning to the like of this, he will deserve speedy destruction. Indeed, methinks this king of thine, who has sent thee on such errand, must be an ignorant fool, taking no thought to the issue of things, and having no wazir of sense and good counsel with whom he may advise. Were he a man of mind, he'd had taken counsel with the wazir, ere sending us the like of this laughable letter. But he shall have a reply similar to his script, and surpassing it, for I will give it to one of the boys of the school to answer. Then send for me, and when I come to the presence, bid me read the letter, and reply thereto. When the king heard the boy's speech, his breast broadened, and he approved his proposal, and his device delighted him. So he conferred gifts upon him, and installing him in his father's office, sent him away rejoicing. And as soon as expired the 3 days of delay which she had appointed, the courier presented himself, and going into the king, demanded the answer. But he put him off to another day, whereupon he went to the end of the carpet room, and spake with unseemly speech, even as the boy had foresaid. Then he betook himself to the bazaar, and cried, Ho, people of the city! I am a courier of the king of the outer Hind, and came with a message to your monarch, who still putteth me off from a reply. Now the term is past which my master limited to me, and your king hath no excuse, and ye are witnesses unto this. When these words reached the king, he sent for the courier, and said to him, O thou that seeketh thine own ruin, art thou not the bearer of a letter from king to king, between whom are secrets? And how cometh it thou goest forth among the folk, and publish king's secrets to the vulgar? Verily thou meritest retribution from us, but this we will forbear, for the sake of returning an answer by thee to this fool of a king of thine. And it befitteth not that any return to him reply, but the least of the boys of the school. Then he sent for the Wazir's son, who came and prostrated himself before Allah, offering up prayers for the king's lasting glory and long life. Whereupon Wazir Khan threw him the letter, saying, Read that letter, and write me an acknowledgment thereof in haste. The boy took the letter, and read it, and smiled. And then he laughed, aloud, and he asked the king, Didst thou send for me to answer this letter? Yes, answered Wazir Khan. And the boy said, O king, methought thou hast sent for me on some grave occasion. Indeed, a lesser than I had answered this letter, but 'tis thine to command, O puissance potentate. Quoth the king, Write the reply forthright, on account of the courier, for that he has appointed a term, and we have delayed him another day. Quoth the boy, with the readiest hearkening and obedience, and pulling out paper and ink case, wrote as follows. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased saying her permitted say. Now, when it was the 927th night, she said, It hath reached me, O auspicious king, that when the boy took the letter and read it forthright, pulled out ink case and paper, and wrote as follows. In the name of Allah, the compassionating and the compassionate, peace be unto him who hath gotten pardon and deliverance, and the mercy of the merciful. But after, O thou who pretendest thyself a mighty king, and art but a king in word and not in deed, we give thee to know that thy letter hath reached us, and we have read it, and have taken note of that which is therein of absurdities and peregrine extravagances, whereby we are certified of thine ignorance and ill will to us. Verily, thou hast put out thy hand to that whereto thou canst never reach. And but we have compassion on Allah's creatures, and the lieges we had not held back from thee. As for thy messenger, he went forth to the market streets, and published the news of thy letter to great and small, whereby he merited retaliation from us. And we spared him, and remitted him his offence of pity for him, seeing that he is excusable with thee, and not for aught of respect to thyself. As for that whereof thou makest mention in thy letter of the slaying of my wazirs, Nolima, and grandees, this is the truth. And I did for a reason that arose with me, and I slew not one man of learning, but there are with me 1,000 of his kind, wiser than he, and cleverer, and wittier, nor is there with me a child, but is filled with knowledge. And I have in the stead of each of the slain of those who surpass in his kind, what is beyond count. Each man of my troops also can cope with an hoard of thine, whilst, as for the monies, I have a manufactory that maketh every day 1,000 pounds of silver, besides gold and precious stones are with me as pebbles. And as for the people of my possessions, I cannot set forth to thee thy goodliness and abundance of means. How darest thou therefore presume upon us, and say to us, Build me a castle in middlemost the main? Verily, this is a marvellous thing, and doubtless it ariseth from the slightness of thy wit. For hadst thou aught of sense, thou hadst inquired of the beatings of the billows and the waftings of the winds. But wall it off from the waves and the surges of the sea, and still the winds, and we will build thee the castle. Now as for thy pretension that thou wilt vanquish me, Allah forfend that such things should befall, and the like of thee should lord it over us and conquer our realm. Nay, The Almighty hath given me the victory over thee, for that thou hast transgressed against me, and rebelled without due cause. Know therefore that thou hast merited retribution from the Lord and from me, but I fear Allah in respect of thee and thy subjects, and will not take horse against thee except after warning. Wherefore, and thou also fear Allah, hasten to send me this year's tribute, else will I turn from my design to ride forth against thee with 1,000,000 and 100,000 fighting men, all furious giants on elephants, and I will range from round about my Wazir, and bid him besiege thee 3 years in lieu of the 3 days delay thou appointest to thy messenger. And I will make myself master of thy dominion, except that I will slay none save thyself alone, and take captive therefrom none but thy harem. Then the boy drew his own portrait in the margin of the letter, and wrote thereunto the words. This answer was written by the least of the boys of the school. After this he sealed it, and handed it to the king, who gave it to the courier, and the man, after taking it, and kissing the king's hand, went forth from him, thanking Allah and the sovereign for his royal clemency to him, and marveling at the boy's intelligence. He arrived at the court of the king, his master, on the 3rd day after the expiration of the term appointed to him, and found that he had called a meeting of his council by reason of the failure of the courier to return at the appointed time. So he went into the king and prostrated himself before him, gave him the letter. The king took it and questioned him of the cause of his tarrying, and how was it that the king of Word Khan. So he told him all he had seen with his own eyes, and heard with his own ears, whereat the king's wit was confounded, and he said, Out on thee! What tale is it that thou tellest me of the like of this king? Answered the courier, O mighty monarch, here am I in thy presence. But open the letter and read it, and the truth of my speech will be manifest to thee. So the king opened the letter, and reading it, and seeing the semblance of the boy who had written it, made sure of the loss of his kingdom, and was perplexed anent the end of his affair. Then, turning to his wazirs and grandees, he acquainted them with what had occurred, and read to them the letter, whereat they were affrighted with the sorest affright, and sought to soothe the king's terrors with words that were only from the tongue, whilst their hearts were torn piecemeal with palpitations of alarm. But Badia, the chief wazir, presently said, Know, O king, that there is no profit in that which my brother wazirs have proffered, and it is my rede that thou write this king a writ, and excuse thyself to him therein, saying, I love thee, and love thy father before thee, and sent thee not this letter by the courier, except only to prove thee, and try thy constancy, and see what was in thee of valiancy, and thy proficiency in matters of practice and theory, and skill in enigmas, and that wherewith thou art endowed of all perfections. So we pray Almighty Allah to bless thee in thy kingdom, and strengthen the defense of thy capital, and add to thy dominions, since thou art mindful of thyself, and managest to accomplish every need of thy subjects. And send it to him by another courier. Exclaimed the king, By Allah of all might, 'tis a marvel of marvels that this man should be a mighty king, and ready for war after his slaughter of all the wise men of his kingdom, and his counselors, and the captain of his host, and that his realm should be populous and prosper after this, and there should issue therefrom the prodigious powers. But the marvelous of all this is that the little ones of its school should return the like of this answer for its king. Verily, of the vileness of my greed I have kindled this fire upon myself and lieges, and I know not how I shall quench it, save by taking the advice of this my wazir. Accordingly, he got ready a costly present with eunuchs and slaves manifold, and wrote the following reply. In the name of Allah, the compassionating, the compassionate, to proceed. O glorious King Word Khan, son of my dear brother Jaliyad, may the Lord have mercy on thee and continue thee. Thine answer to our letter hath reached us, and we have read it, and apprehended its contents, and see therein that which gladdeneth us, and this is the utmost of that which we sought of Allah for thee. So we beseech him to exalt thy dignity, and establish the pillars of thy state, and give thee the victory over thy foes, and those who propose thee frowardness, Know, O king, that thy father was my brother, and that there were between us in his lifetime pacts and covenants, and never saw he from me aught save weal, nor ever saw I from him other than good. And when he deceased, and thou tookest seat upon the throne of his kingship, there betided us the utmost joy and gladness. But when the news reached us of that which thou didst with thy Wazirs and the notables of thy state, we feared lest the report of thee should come to the ears of some king other than ourselves, and he should presume against thee, for that we deemed thee negligent of thine affairs, and of the maintenance of thy defences, and neglectful of the interests of thy kingdom. So we write unto thee that should arouse thy spirit. But when we saw that thou returnest us the like of this reply, our heart was set at ease for thee. May Allah give thee enjoyment of thy kingdom, and establish thee in thy dignity, and so peace be with thee. Then he dispatched the letter and the presents toward Khan with an escort of 100 horses. And Shahrazad perceived the dawn of the day, and ceased to say her permitted say. And so do I cease my telling of this tale for today, till it be morrow.